So let's start this out with some maybe less than spiritual information. So there's this kid in college, and the discussion is focused around God and is there a God and atheism and agnosticism and things like this. And so one of the kids had indicated that he believed in God, and so the professor says, "Do you know what an atheist is?" "Yeah, I know," he replied. Professor says, "Well, why aren't you one?" Student said, "Well, I'm a Christian, I believe in God." Professor's a little irritated. He says, "Well, why are you a Christian?" He says, "Well, my parents were missionaries. They believed in God, believed in Jesus, and I was brought up that way, and that's why I believe." So, mom and dad are Christian. I'm a Christian. So now the professor's really irritated. He said, "That's not a good reason. What if your mom was a fool and your dad was a fool? What would that make you?" The student shrugged his shoulders. He said, "Well, I guess I'd be an atheist." Thought I'd start us out spiritual basis here. All right. Open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 21. I guess I better put my glasses on. 1 Samuel 21, beginning at verse 8. And David said to Ahimelech, "And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here, wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take that, take it, for there's no other save that here." And David said, "There's none like that. Give it to me." And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and he went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said unto him, "Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in the dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? David laid these words in his heart, and he was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spit fall down upon his beard. Then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, you see this man is mad. Wherefore have you then brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that you've brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So, just a little background, so you know, back in that day, they treated people who were goofy like that a little differently. There was, a measure of fear for them, and this king didn't want to be anywhere near David. He's basically saying, get rid of this guy. I don't want him anywhere around me. So, and that's what they did. So, let me read something that David would later write. It's pretty interesting. A good contrast to his behavior then and his mindset years later. I say David. This is actually Solomon, who obtained a lot of this information from David, because David taught Solomon. A lot of people don't realize this. They think, Solomon got all his wisdom from God. Well, that's yes and no. He got a lot of training from his dad. David taught his son a lot of good things. So Solomon really was a wise man, but David was a pretty wise man too. So Proverbs 29:25 says this, and you don't need to turn it, I'll just read it. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. So the fear of man brings a snare. The thing that fear did to David was really a snare. And what happens when you have fear, fear can actually put you in bondage. It can trap you. And the biggest thing it does is this. It diminishes your reliance on God. I've often said this. The greater your fear, the less your faith. Because the greater your fear, the more you think God is not able to handle this. This is beyond God's control. These circumstances are too great. I can't see any way out of this. There's just no way that I can get out of this. This is too much even for God. Fear goes up, faith goes down. Your reliance on God goes down. So David really, in a real sense, abandoned his reliance on God. And David had great faith. And this guy that, faced Goliath, remember, that took faith. It didn't just take courage. He came to Goliath, in the name of the Lord, confident that God would enable him to slay this giant. And I've said this before, and I like to get it across. We think of giants based on those giants that we've seen from time to time in our populations. They're these big 7, 8, 9 feet lumbering giants. Well, the giants back then weren't that. They were strong, powerful, well-muscled, agile individuals. They weren't lumbering giants. They were quick. They were swift. They were a formidable enemy. There's a story. I don't know if any of you have heard this story. I think it's a true story. I've listened to accounts of it from witnesses. It was hushed up by the military. If you ever get a chance and you hear the story, the giant of Afghanistan, listen to it. I think it's Kandahar. Anyway, what happened was this. There were some units that went missing over in Afghanistan. And so this special unit was sent in to find these guys. And so they're going, and there's, I don't know how many of them was, 7 or 8 guys. And they come upon this cave, and it's set up, and it's got a little cliff-like and a big, huge cave. And at the bottom, over to the right, so you got the cave up here, you got a ledge, a big ledge, and then down below you got all this stuff. And they see soldiers' gear. They see smashed pieces of gear, radio equipment, uniform, stuff like this. And so they go up, and all of a sudden, out of the cave comes this giant, this enormous 9 or 10 foot creature. And he's a man. And he's red-haired. And he is like nothing any of them have ever seen. And so they're pretty close to it. And the thing has got a spear in its hand. And they're shooting. And they're bullets. And they got some pretty powerful weapons. And their bullets are not affecting this thing. And this thing moves with the quickness of a mountain lion. I mean, it's just quick. It's agile. It takes its spear, goes to there was one soldier, his name was Dan, and he had rushed forward to get a better shot, I guess. And the thing rushed at him and speared him, actually. held him up on its spear. And the sergeant or whoever it was in charge starts yelling at his men, shoot for the head, shoot for the head. And so they finally brought it down, shooting it in the head. I forget how much it weighed, but it was so huge. It had this foul odor. It said it stunk like rotting carcasses. And this thing had literally been eating those soldiers that had disappeared. And they had to fly a Chinook in with a cargo net and put this giant carcass in the net and flew it away. Later, these guys were approached and told by what was obviously a CIA, basically told them, you will say nothing about this. It's confidential. It didn't happen. You understand? Yeah, I understand. So that's the kind of giants that we're talking about here. That's the way Goliath was. So David had faced this giant, and it was not an easy thing. It wasn't, I mean, you'd have had to really been some kind of special guy, ordinary guy, to face such a creature. And remember, all he had was what? A slingshot. Okay, so David somehow, in his running from Saul, and it wasn't wrong for him to run from Saul, and sometimes you need to leave, you know, fear can be healthy. Don't get me wrong, we're talking about fear today. Fear can be healthy. You know, you see a rattlesnake, of which I've had, I don't know how many encounters I've had with snakes, including many with rattlesnakes. But I can tell you this, when I see one, I want to get away from it. You know, I remember laying on a road one time, little narrow fire road. It was not as well, maybe as wide as this table, not quite. And it was going down, and I had slipped. We're on a search and rescue. And I had slipped, and when I fell, all of a sudden, right beside me, 4 feet away, I hear this rattle. Snake. I can tell you I was filled with fear, because I knew instantly what it was. I knew it was close. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was close. And I knew, and I listened as the way they do is the intensity goes up. It'll rattle, and when it's getting ready to strike, it will reach a pitch, and then it's ready to go when it reaches its pitch. And this thing was getting there. And I'm laying there, and I know it's here, but there's some shrubbery on the side of this road, and the side is just a mountain. So this is a mountain road that curves down on a mountain, goes into this valley. And I'm laying there and saying, where is this thing? And I don't dare move, because movement would likely attract it, and I'd get hit. And so I finally see it, and it's right there on the side of the road, behind this bush. And I had a 9-shot revolver, and I take a shot, and I'm shaking so bad. It's fortunate that I hit the mountainside. I mean, I was shook. You know, the adrenaline, you're just full of adrenaline. This is a healthy kind of fear. So I'm not saying all fear is bad. I'm not saying it's ever wrong to have fear. But it's kind of fear that will save your life and you know, get you out of danger and things like this. So long story short, it took me 9 shots. On the 9th shot, I hit it. But that was after I deep breath, and finally I nailed it. But anyway, it's not about my snakes stories. I used to teach in the junior class upstairs, and
You were used as a belt mount?
no,
Was that when you were in the Navy, or?
no, I was out of the Navy. So no, I lived in Arizona. A friend of mine had called me up at midnight, and my dad's missing. He'd gone missing in the Superstition Mountains, hunting for gold. And shortly after that incident, I located him. But, that's another story in and of itself. But anyway, you got me sidetracked now. Where was I? I don't know. I forgot.
Healthy fear.
Yeah, healthy fear. So sometimes we reach a point where we think God can't help us, and we think God's abandoned us, or we think God may be unwilling to deliver us. We may be impatient with God's timetable. And sometimes you can have fear like this. You think that God isn't going to help you because you stupidly put yourself in that situation. Okay? And I don't know about you, but I put myself in enough dangerous situations that, I just thank God that that isn't true, that God won't help you, because God's delivered me a number of times from situations where I stupidly put myself. So we think that. David forgot the lessons that Moses taught. Deuteronomy 11:25. Moses is talking to the children of Israel, the Jews. There shall no man be able to stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land that you shall tread on, as he hath said unto you. God makes your enemies afraid of you. I don't know if you know it or not, but God has used America so much, and one of the things that God has blessed America with, and with a blessing which I think is slowly evaporating because of our wickedness, because of our killing millions of babies, for example, but is the fear of America is evaporating around the world. God gave these nations a healthy fear of America. They really do fear us. And the only reason that China has not taken Taiwan is because they're afraid of America. If America wasn't in the picture, Taiwan would be China. Trust me, it would. If it wasn't for the fear of America, there would be so much more evil in the land. So God has used America in many ways and has placed fear on the nations for America. So anyway, I'm getting sidetracked again. So fear brought David into the camp of the enemy, and that's another lesson for us. It's another point. Fear will bring you closer to the enemy. Fear will bring you into the camp of the enemy. Fear will bring you into the camp of Satan. Satan will use your fear against you. So you've got to have a healthy balance. Again, fear in itself, in and of itself, is not bad. We all need to have fear. God gave us that emotion to protect ourselves. We ought to be afraid of snakes. We ought to be afraid of this or that. Take steps to preserve it. But we can't let fear govern us and control us. I know people who, to this day, won't go out of their house. They still order meals in because they're afraid of the environment. And there are countless widows and widowers who are sitting in their homes. They're glued to that television set, and all they're doing is feeding their fears. They're seeing one crisis after another. They're seeing one bad thing after another. They're seeing a world that's pardon the expression, going to hell, and they're just petrified. Petrified. That's not a healthy fear. That's a fear that says God isn't able to control. That's a fear that says, God, this is bigger than you. And we can't ever let that happen. So we may turn to those who might be able to deliver us before we turn to God. So, you get a pronouncement, and most of us, if not all of us in here, have had doctors look at us and tell us, I hate to tell you this, but fill in your own blank. And those kinds of things can bring fear. The question is this: when you get pronouncements like that, Who do you turn to? Do you turn to God? We should. You should, because that will help in your fear level, help diminish your fear, bring it down to a reasonable aspect. Not saying you should never have fear. Fear of getting sick or getting cancer or dying. But you ought to be able to balance that fear and say, you know what? God's got it. God's got my back. God can take care of even this. And, you know, I like to have this mindset. I try. Not always successful. This is the mindset that I strive for when it comes to fear. So picture this in your mind. You're standing with two other guys, and there's in front of you this very powerful figure. And he says to you, I want you to bow. I'm going to play some music, and you need to bow. You need to kneel. And your buddies say, no, King, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And the king says, well, you're going to go into that fire over there. So I'm talking obviously about the three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and how they were thrown into the fiery furnace. We need to have their mindset. Does anybody remember what they said? He said, we won't bow, King. He said, what?
He said, our God is able to rescue us, but even if he don't.
Exactly. We're not going to bow. God's able to rescue us. But you know what? It may be that he won't, and if he don't, I'm good with that. And that's the mindset that I strive to have and we ought to have. I know, and you know, that those three young men had a fear, a natural fear of that fire. You can't be a human being and not have some kind of fear. Now, I understand there are men, there are individuals out there, especially when you get into the level like of a Navy SEAL. Those guys compartmentalize their fear. It's not that they don't have fear, but they have made it such that fear is put in a little box. They lock that box, and they won't open that box. They just won't. And they compartmentalize it. Not all of us can do it that well, and God bless those that can do that. But we ought to, in order to minimize our fear, rest strong in God. How do you have that? How do you increase your faith so that you can have that kind of faith when those times come that bring fear? How do you do that? Well, I can tell you one of the ways, of course, is to stay in the book. And when I say stay in the book, I mean read it. Not just read it, but study it. Think about God, who he is, and think about your relationship with him. Think about all the times he's rescued you. Think of the things that he's done for you. Think of the things that God has done for others. And God is no respecter of persons. And quit thinking about how you don't deserve. God is no respecter of persons. God loves you as much as he does any of them. As much as he loved John the Baptist. As much as he loves anyone. God loves you. So that'll help you build your fear up. So we cannot use the enemies and weapons of the world to defend ourselves. We just can't. We have to learn to depend on the Lord. David would later write, what time I'm afraid, I will trust in thee. What time I'm afraid, I'll trust thee. He recognized that there would be times in his life when he would be afraid. And I guarantee you there will be times in your life when you're going to be afraid. What times you are afraid, trust in the Lord. And what does it mean to trust in the Lord? Well, it doesn't mean to just sit there and say a mantra. Oh, I'm afraid, I will trust in the Lord. Lord, I trust in thee. Oh, God, it's not that. I'm not saying you can't do that. That's fine. But you have to have a mindset that says that God is able to help me and that God is willing to help me, and that God will help me. So we're all willing to say God is able to help us, and we're all willing to say God is willing to help us, but you got to add the one thing, God will help me. Yes, sir.
We need to, when we trust in the Lord, it's trusting in His Word, because the Word became flesh. And when we trust in His Word, then we need to rest in His power.
Amen. Amen. That's very important. But you know what? If you don't get in the Word and study it, you really aren't going to be able to rely on His promises. You're going to be ignorant. And
there are times though when you get in a position where you just realize and you just accept it. Because when I broke my back, I had a burst fracture of L1 vertebrae. They didn't think I was going to live. And I told the wife when I was in the ambulance, if I don't make it, I'll see you later in heaven. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
I'm here. And I went into the hospital, and I witnessed other people in there about it, and I walked out of there. 3 other guys that had the same injury I had died. And all they did is cried and moaned and carried on.
And I have no doubt.
And they had, it was...
I have no doubt that the reason you were that way was because of your reliance in God, and you had that background and where God was a part of your belief system.
I just laid there. I said, well, if it happens, if I die, I die. I'll be with the Lord. I'm not worried about it. And it was I had no worry about it. I don't know what, it just was something I wasn't worried about.
That's the mindset that the 3 Hebrew children had, and that's the mindset that we have to have. But I'm telling you, that is not a typical mindset of most Christians. It really isn't. It should be, but it isn't. And why isn't it? Well, very simple. They're not staying in the Word. They're not thinking about who God is. They're not studying about God and the promises of God. They don't realize their relationship to God. They're God's child. They're part of God's family. And they're not really connecting the dots. And if you don't connect those dots, then fear is going to control, and guess who's going to take advantage of that fear? I don't know if you've ever seen this or not, but you ever seen anybody frozen with fear, or ever experienced a time you were frozen with fear? Fear can freeze you in place. I've had that experience, with the snake thing that I was telling you about. I was frozen in fear. I didn't know what to do. For a brief few seconds, I was frozen. Sometimes fear will freeze Christians to the point that they become immobile. Like I was telling you, there are Christians out there who are still locked in their homes, afraid to come out, afraid to move. And we shouldn't let fear, and I'm not saying it's ever wrong to stay in your home. Maybe there is. You ought to stay till you assess the situation. See what's out there. See what's going on. I can tell you if violence was out on the streets, you might be wise. Wisdom would dictate, look, stay in your house. See what's going on. Don't be reckless. Don't have that mindset that there are some idiots out there, I have to admit, who in a time like that, like there would be violence, they say, oh, I'm curious, and they're going to go out and see it. They're going to go out and get close to it because they want to see what's going on. That's not wisdom. That's stupidity. God teaches us we're not to be stupid, we're not to be ignorant. So fear will always lead you away from God. Fear will always drive you. Fear will cause you to seek shelter in other than God. So you'll seek shelter in the home of the enemy. David was seeking shelter in the home of an enemy. This was a Philistine. And Philistines were enemies of Israel. Philistines were enemies of David. David had killed thousands of them. And here he is in the camp of one of the kings of his enemy. What put him there? He wasn't on a soul-winning mission. He was afraid. So fear robbed David of his strength. He became weak. He relied on his own wits and cunning, and fear followed after David. So once you permit fear to dominate you, it will drive you, it will rule you, it will govern your actions, it'll govern your thoughts, your thinking, and I guarantee you, Satan will provide opportunities to feed that fear, to enlarge that fear, and to make you do things that you otherwise would not have done. Fear does that. Fear humiliated David. It hurt his reputation. It diminished his standing. Fear can bring humiliation. Here he is, once the vaunted warrior, and now he's having to play like he's Looney Tunes, like he's lost his mind. Fear, what a humbling thing. So let me read you a few statistics, and I've got enough time to wrap this up. This is interesting. I did just a little brief research for this. So in 2021, here is America's top fears. Number 1, loved ones dying. Number 2, loved ones becoming seriously ill. Number 3, mass shootings. Number 4, not having enough money for retirement. Number 5, terrorism. Number 6, government corruption. Number 7, becoming terminally ill. Number 8, hate crimes. Number 9, high medical bills. And number 10, widespread civil unrest, another way of saying lawlessness, criminal violence. 2020 was labeled as the most stressful year on record. The American Psychological Association said that rampant anxiety, in other words, fear, has become a national mental health emergency. We see crimes being committed by people who clearly show they have no fear of being arrested. We have politicians who are publicly calling for the dismantling of and defunding of police, which in essence is calling for total chaos and lawlessness. These are my words, by the way. I took notes on this. Do you see how Satan is capitalizing on fear? Fear in the land. He's using that to bring chaos. Somehow these people have managed to get elected by stupid people, and they keep getting reelected. We see people who are in positions of great authority, like prosecutors, who are leading murderers or letting murderers go free, or not prosecuting at all. To me, as a lawyer, this is so incredible that you'd have a prosecutor who would have on his docket, the way things go, it's this. Police arrest somebody. When they arrest, they've got a arrest record, they've got the facts, and they don't do charges without probable cause and without some good set of facts. The cops know the law. They know who they can arrest and who they can't arrest. They're taught this. So when charges come to a prosecutor, all he has to do is look at it and say, can I prove my case? And he'll read that and he'll know whether or not he or she can prove their case. And usually you can, and a lot of times prosecutors work from this aspect. They think, well, maybe I can't, but unless I try, I won't know, because I might be able to break down one of these people and make them as a witness or one of the co-defendants. I mean, there's a zillion ways that prosecutors know that they can win a case, even if it's a weak case. So typically a good prosecutor, if it's a serious enough crime, will go ahead and prosecute, waiting to see how things tumble out, because you get evidence as you investigate more, as you do discovery, as you examine witnesses and so forth. So now we have prosecutors who are elected officials, who are looking at cases that police bring in that have solid facts and throwing away. Like the Smollett case.
What I was wondering, don't all these prosecutors have to take an oath when they get their law degree in that? Take an oath on
Yeah,
backing the law?
that means nothing. That means nothing to them. So the Smollett case, think about this. The guy was prosecuted. First of all, the prosecutor over there in Illinois not Webb. The prosecutor in Illinois was Fox. She refused to prosecute him. So the cops were incensed because they knew I had a good case. So they got a special prosecutor who prosecuted him and got a verdict. Got a verdict. And what did they do? They let him go. Yeah, slap on the wrist and have a nice day. Incredible. So when you get those kinds of people elected in your government, and we've got them scattered throughout our government, those kinds of people, we've got them scattered in our Justice Department, in our judges, you name it, they're everywhere. When you get that kind of people, you've got corruption on a level this nation has never seen. And so as we see that, we have a tendency to get afraid, to have fear. And we can't afford that. Let me finish up and then I'll let you take over. 1 in 5 Americans reported they were afraid that political differences might burn bridges between their family and friends. Oh my goodness. Differences in opinion over presidential candidate choice and vaccination have created strife in the most loving of families over the past year. Others have been cut off from loved ones due to extremist views with a growing frequency, which is a relatively new phenomenon in the United States. I can tell you this, that the ones that are breaking off the relationships are those with the liberal mindset. Those with the conservative mindset, you know, like if you voted for Trump, for example, or you're conservative, those are not the people who are saying, well, I'm not going to have anything to do with you. If you vote for Hillary, I'm not having anything to do. Those are not the people who are cutting off the relationship. I'm not saying there aren't some there, but the vast majority are the ones who've taken that extremist position that if you vote against abortion, if you vote for Trump, or if you vote for this or that, I ain't having nothing to do with you. Those are the liberal people who are doing that. It's the extreme left, not the right. In earlier days, when you and I were growing up, and there was Democrats and Republicans, that would not be the case. You could vote for one side or the other, and there might be disagreement, and you'd argue about things, but it wasn't breaking up family relationship. Nobody was saying, well, if you're that stupid, I don't want anything to do with it. That was not happening. That was not happening. Not saying it ever didn't happen, but as a general rule, today it's happening. But the reason is this is important. We're in a fight for survival in America. And it's no longer a Democrat versus a Republican. It's no longer a left versus right. It is good versus evil. Evil is attempting to take over this country. Why? Because it is the most powerful. Because it is the one thing, the one country God has been using to hold off the tide of evil from nations like China and Russia, who would otherwise envelop the world in their evil. Satan is behind the throne in China. Satan is behind the throne in Russia, and we know it. Satan is behind the throne in those various countries that we've seen wanting to destroy Israel. Satan is behind it all. So bottom line is this: don't let fear control you. If it does, you're going to be the worse for it. You're going to suffer for it. I think the greatest mistake we ever made was abandoning our school systems
Yeah.
and allowing our entire system from grade school all the way to the universities to be populated by liberals who just thought in such an extreme different fashion from the majority of the populace. And we let these people come in and educate our children. And then we took it a step further, and I plead guilty to this. We decided that it was so bad in there with these liberal teachers, we weren't going to allow our children in these places. So we literally totally abandoned the institutions. So that, I think,
They're churning out useful idiots and
We're-
have been for the last
we are
20 years.
reaping, yeah, we sowed and now we're reaping the whirlwind.